everybody, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast. This is your host, Ryan Coyle, back with my weekly show, the Fantasy Football Stardom Situm Show. Straight losses with our start sit list. We did get back to our winning ways last week, so applaud for that. With a pretty convincing win as well, with our start list outscoring the sit list 106-70. One of my sick quarterbacks was Matthew Stafford. I did the episode before he was ruled out with his concussion. Obviously, he got 0 points last week by not playing, so I removed my other quarterback from the list, and we still outscored them by 36 points. So a really good week. We'll run through the last week's results real quick. Had Daniel Jones. He had 18 points, finished 14th. I had him 17 points, finished 15th. As I said, I took him out of the standings for the week. Had Leonard Fournette, 11 points, finished 21st. Najee Harris, 9 points, finished 28th. Brandon Ayuk, 12 points, finished 33rd. Devontae Smith, 13 points, finished 28th. Had the best tight end in fantasy last week with Cole Kmet scoring 23. Had TJ Hawkinson with 11 points scoring in 7th. Giants defense, 9 points in 7th as well. So not exactly murderer's row there, a lot of explosions, but a bunch of guys who had solid kind of performing weeks. And more times than not, if you just have guys who are steady eddying and kind of consistently just getting you the middle tier fantasy points, you're gonna win a lot of matchups out there, just because due to nature of a lot of guys just flopping on given weeks. And then when you get fortunate with a guy like Cole Kmet having a really big game last week, that's always good as well. And then when we go to the sit list, we had Kirk Cousins at the Bills. He finished 17th or 16th with 17 points. Big miss here with James Conner. 23 points. He finished second. That was the big miss of the week. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I was right about him. 0 points last week, finishing 76. So I assume he registered some snaps in the backfield, but he's kind of been tuned out in that Kansas City backfield. It looks like it's Pacheco's now. Michael Pittman had 12 points, finishing 38th. Adam Thielen, 9 points, finishing 44th. Noah Fant and Robert Tonyan, really good plays here. A combined 7 points between the two of them. Fant finished 18th, Tonyan 37th. And then Colts defense sitting them versus the Raiders, 3 points, 21st. That adds up to 70 points. So 36-point victory there for our starts over our sits. And that moves us to, after the 2 weeks that we didn't record, 6-2 on the season. So we head now into week 11, looking to keep it rolling and to get you guys set for your fantasy football matchup, as we're kind of sadly approaching playoffs almost. So some must-win games on the calendar, on the schedule for you guys as you head towards your playoffs. And looking to make a playoff run this year in fantasy. So we'll start it off, as always, with the starts list. We'll go to the quarterback spot first. I'm going with Justin Fields. He's a must-start fantasy quarterback every week now until he proves otherwise. I was fortunate enough to pick him up as a free agent last week after he had those few big weeks. Since week 7, he's the highest-scoring fantasy quarterback by 38 points. A few of the other higher-scoring guys have had buys in there, but still by a whopping 38 points, and he's the fourth place guy, I believe, is Geno Smith. First place, Justin Fields, and Fields has outscored Smith by close to 50 points. So, 70 points. He was like 138 fantasy points to like 75. So pretty insane how good Fields has been last week since the Bears really opened up that offense in that Monday night game versus the Patriots. They've been so much better, and they've scored as a team 29 points each week. So this is a pretty dangerous offense out there, led by Fields, especially with his legs. Gets a good matchup against a bad Falcons team. I like him to go off again this week. Second quarterback, we're going to go to this guy back-to-back weeks, a guy I'm not the biggest fan of, and I'm not sure how he keeps leading his teams to victories, but he does, and that's Daniel Jones of the Giants playing the Lions this week. The Lions last week gave up the QB1 performance to Justin Fields, as I just touched on. Daniel Jones is another mobile quarterback, as Saquon Barkley, it came out, calls him Vanilla Vic. You might not get a top 5 quarterback performance here, but he's solid enough and reliable enough to be like a middle-tier quarterback in that 10 to 12 range against these bad defenses. You have some pretty good quarterbacks out this week for fantasy-wise. Off the top of my head, Geno Smith, who's been a starter for one of my teams for most of the season. Tom Brady, both those guys are on bye. So if you're in a pinch, look to Daniel Jones this week. I think he has a upside to have a pretty nice performance. We move to the running backs now. Miles Sanders at the Colts for the Eagles. Eagles got a little pass heavy last week, led to their first loss. Miles only carried it 12 times. He's been averaging about 16 carries per game on the year. I think they find a way to emphasize the run a little bit more this week, and he gets going. too much passing in the first half last week. I think that kind of got the Eagles behind. Rely on what's got you here so far to that 8-1 record, and emphasize the run and work off that with the pass. So I like Miles Sanders to get back going this week after a down week last week. Second running back played in that Monday Night Football game as well. We're going to go with Brian Robinson Jr. for the Commanders. Washington might have found, that winning blueprint last week against Philly. Pound the rock with Robinson. He had over 20 carries, slow drives down the field, and that's kind of the way I think that they can win games with that pretty strong defense they have to boot. Now the Washington Commanders get to face a Texans defense that's coming off allowing 152 yards on 35 carries to Saquon Barkley last week. He also scored a touchdown, found his way into the end zone. I'm not saying Brian Robinson Jr. is him, is Saquon, but he has a very realistic shot this week of going for 100 yards and a touchdown. This Texans team in general is terrible. I think Washington has a chance to get up on them as well and kind of bleed out the clock with Robinson. So I like him in this week in this matchup against the Texans. We'll go to the wide receivers. We'll stay with Washington. This is a bit of a dart throw for me, and I'm banking on some explosive plays from him. That's Curtis Samuel, receiver for Washington. If you need a guy, maybe he's on the free agent market as a flex or kind of a wide receiver 3 if you have one of those leagues. Look at Curtis Samuel this week against the Texans. Like I said, bit of a dart throw, but I think he could be in for a breakout game looking at his numbers. Over his past 3 games, he's only averaging 4 targets per game, but on those catches that he has, he's averaging 17.4 yards per catch. So I think he has a chance to get one of those deep catches and explosive plays and take it to the house. If he has a long house call and he goes for 2 catches, 75 yards and a touchdown, that's probably going to be a top 15 to 20 receiver week for fantasy football. So all you need is one big play from him, averaging 17.4 yards a catch over his last 3 games. I think he's due for a big one and a long explosive touchdown. So dart throw there. We're going with Curtis Samuel. Next wide receiver, we're going to go another bit of a dart throw, but big-time upside play. That's Kadarius Toney at the Chargers. The Chargers are just banged up across their entire defense. J.C. Jackson out. Joey Bosa's still out. They're now missing 2 of their starting defensive linemen are out for the year. They cut another one last week. This defense has just been torn apart by injuries and whatnot. And the Chiefs found kind of a new role and a new offensive toy with Kadarius Toney. He had 4 catches for 57 yards and a touchdown last week, as well as 2 rushes for 33 yards, almost 100 yards from scrimmage. I think the Chiefs, as he just gets more and more comfortable with the playbook, will continue to get him more involved. And I love his upside this week against a Chargers defense, like I said, that's pretty banged up. So now we go to the tight ends. We'll ride with tight end 1 from last week, Cole Kmet. He's had such an up and down season. Started off like the first 3 weeks, I think, without a catch. But since the Bears kind of opened the playbook and realized, let's let our athletic mobile quarterback use his legs and be a little bit more dynamic and get him moving, throw on the run, and throw to one of our more talented pass catchers and tight end Cole Kmet, we might have some success. He's got that matchup against the Falcons, coming off a tight end 1 week. Picked it up with Fields. I think he's a must start in fantasy leagues unless you have a top-level tight end. But those are really hard to come by if it's not like Travis Kelce. Dallas Goedert's out now too. George Kittle hasn't done that much in fantasy recently. Cole Kmet, top 5 play this week. Second tight end, we'll go with Juwan Johnson of the Saints versus the Rams. They're playing a Rams team, I think, that's dead in the water and it's just ready to fold, pack it in. He's had at least 5 targets at 3 out of his last 5 games, and he's a guy who scores touchdowns. He's a red zone threat. As I always say with tight ends, it's like throwing darts at the board. You better hope you hit a bullseye because the tight end position is just so poor right now in fantasy football. I think turn into like a touchdown dependent guy like Juwan Johnson. Hope he sneaks his way in, maybe gets 1, potentially 2 touchdowns. There's a chance of that. And against a Rams team, like I said, that is dead in the water, I like him to have a pretty solid opportunity to have a good game here. And then defense, we're going to go with the 49ers versus the Cardinals. Looks like Kyler's likely going to be out again this week. I'm not sure how confident I'll be in Colt McCoy stringing back-to-back consecutive successful starts. So even if Kyler does play, I don't like him in this matchup against a really good 49ers defensive line. The Cardinals offensive line, not the best. I think they'll be able to get to either Kyler or Colt McCoy and cause some havoc, and the 49ers get a win. They've been playing really low-scoring games recently. So to run back through the start list, Justin Fields and Daniel Jones at quarterback, Miles Sanders, Brian Robinson Jr. at running back, Curtis Samuel, Kadarius Toney at receiver, Cole Kmet, Juwan Johnson at tight end, and 49ers defense versus Cardinals. We go to the sit list now, sticking on Monday night. We'll go with quarterback Jimmy G versus the Cardinals. neutral site game there in Mexico City. Thought I'd just throw that in there, but this is what I was meaning to talk about for the quarterbacks start list. Quarterbacks who are out this week on bye: Tua, Geno Smith, Tom Brady, and Trevor Lawrence. All guys that you probably wouldn't normally start over Jimmy G. If one of those guys are your starter, I don't. If Trevor Lawrence has been your starter for the year, I don't know how successful you're going to be. But Tua, Geno, and Brady have definitely been starting caliber quarterbacks for the fantasy season. If you're in like a 12-team league, Brady probably staking in there. But Tua and Geno definitely. If you need a guy off the waiver wire this week with your quarterback on a bye, don't look at Jimmy G. I think he's just really playing that game manager role, and especially with the emergence of Christian McCaffrey now, Elijah Mitchell back, Deebo Samuel out of the backfield. This team just wants to run. There's a stat on the broadcast last week. Jimmy G the 49ers are 10-2 when Jimmy G throws 0 touchdown passes. So that shows they don't have to throw the ball to win with him. And that really doesn't kind of benefit them for fantasy football. So we're keeping Jimmy G on the bench this week. Like I said, I would rather pick up a guy like Daniel Jones if I need to throw in a starter this week. Second quarterback, I'm going to go with Dak Prescott of the Vikings. Just hasn't been that great since coming back. Had 2 interceptions last week versus the Packers. This is a interesting matchup against the Vikings where they're favored by 1. Can't really get a good read on this one, but I think we're going to see a lot of running game in this matchup, and Dak Prescott I would keep on the bench. Next, we go to the running back. We'll go with Michael Carter on our bench at the Patriots. Belichick just rules the Jets. I'm not trusting anything about their offense this week. 13 straight wins, I think it is, and since 2015, the Jets haven't beat the Patriots. I'm not expecting much to change this week, and Bill Belichick to shut them down. Next, we're going to go with running back Kareem Hunt at the Bills. I had this on here originally because of the thunder snow that it was called, 3 to 6 feet potentially, but that game's getting moved to Detroit, so take with this what you will. But Nick Chubb's really been dominating the snaps and the touches out of that backfield. He's the goal line guy there. I just really don't want to touch this backfield right now unless it's Nick Chubb. Keeping Kareem Hunt on the bench, I think his role is slowly fading away, and I think there's better options out there this week. Next, we go to the receivers. We're going to take Garrett Wilson at the Patriots. He did have a nice first game in the first go-around against the Patriots, going for 115 yards, but I don't think he replicates that, especially with the Patriots coming off the bye. Bill Belichick dominant off the bye, 15-7. There was another stat on our NFL Big 5 Games of the Week podcast this week. Bill Belichick is 53-5 against first or second year quarterbacks at home as coach of the Patriots. I think he rattles Zach Wilson. Obviously, that leads to a lack of production for Garrett Wilson, and I think the Jets are going to get held below 10 points this week. That's why I have Michael Carter and Garrett Wilson both on the list. Second receiver, we're going to go Adam Thielen for the Vikings versus the Cowboys. He's the third option in this passing game now, behind Justin Jefferson and the newly acquired TJ Hawkinson. They've also been emphasizing the run this year. On my Big 5 Games of the Week podcast that I just mentioned, I had the stat. The only game that the Vikings have lost this year, Dalvin Cook went six carries for 17 yards. Every other game, he's gone over 75 yards, I believe, or 70 yards except one, and they've won all those games. So I think they're going to have a heavy emphasis on the run this week with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison, with the Packers really showing some the Cowboys showing some susceptibility on the ground as the Packers ran all over them for over 200 yards last week on 37 carries. So I think a heavy emphasis in the Minnesota run game limits Adam Thielen's production, and I don't really trust him that much now going forward with TJ Hawkinson and already with Justin Jefferson's kind of target share that he already has. Now we go to the tight ends. We'll go with Tyler Higbee at the Saints. I had this as a bold prediction if Stafford was out. It looks like he's going to play, but I think the Rams might get shut out this week. The Saints are always good for a few eye-popping defensive performances each year. They shut out the Raiders earlier in the year, 24-0. At the Saints, they always seem to have a few really good defensive games there each year at home, like we see kind of against the Bucs here and there. I think Tyler Higbee's kind of production will be limited this week, but with Stafford back and Cooper Kupp out, it's like I always say, it's a dart throw. Maybe he gets the Rams kind of share of the targets this week. But dart throw here, I'm going to say Saints have a really good game, potential shutout. Keep Tyler Higbee on the bench. Second, once again had this as before. It was like right before I started recording is when they announced this game was going to be moved. But I have Dawson Knox versus the Browns in the Snow Bowl. He hasn't really done much this year in fantasy. He's been a major disappointment after getting a big contract extension right before the year. I thought he was going to be featured part of the offense. But the Browns, if they do have one thing, I think it's some nice backer and safety play to match up with Dawson Knox. So I'll gladly keep Dawson Knox on my bench this week if you even have him rostered. And then defense, we're going to sit the Cowboys at the Vikings. As I talked about kind of with Adam Thielen a little bit ago, I think Cook runs all over this Cowboys defense this week. Maybe a few Kirk Cousins turnovers in a big game in that like 4 o'clock primetime window kind of scares him and falters for the Vikings. But I expect a heavy emphasis from the run game and maybe a long rushing touchdown from Dalvin Cook in this one. He did have an 80-yard rush last week. He's good. He's good to bust off a long run every once in a while. I think that could be this week, and they kind of run all over the Cowboys, exposing them there. So real quick, run back through the sit list. We're sitting Jimmy G and Dak at quarterback, Michael Carter and Kareem Hunt at running back, Garrett Wilson and Adam Thielen at receiver, Tyler Higbee and Dawson Knox at tight end, and Cowboys D at the Vikings. But that'll do it for NFL Big Five games of the week. The week 11 edition, or excuse me, not NFL Big Five games of the week, the Fantasy Football Stardom Sit-em Show, week 11 edition. Can't believe we're already here, but we're amping up towards playoff time for fantasy football. Look forward to hopefully carrying you to your championship. Please, if you haven't already, like, subscribe. Looking to get to 7-2 as we come back on the show next week. Stay safe out there, everyone, and we will talk soon.